Hello and welcome to KnightHunter Books. Today we're doing our wrap-up for September. You may have noticed in a different location. We have finally rearranged our house so that we have a recording room, so we're not in the lounge anymore. Which hopefully means we can record without having to tidy most of the house. Maybe more often?
Unless somebody's coming over that doesn't know we do booktube, in which case it's all in such a state that it can be readily rearranged.
Do let us know if anything isn't working, the lighting in particular. I think we both had a reasonable month reading.
No. I had a reasonable reading month. You had a ridiculous reading month.
I did. My reading month, I didn't read many books, but every single one I read, I rated above 4 stars. Like, my average for the month is 4.4 stars. That's just ridiculous. Like, my average for last year, I looked this up earlier because I was intrigued, was 3.6. So yes, a very good reading month, especially because Nine Fox Gambit I sneakily wrapped up last month, even though I finished it like a couple days into the month.
What, taking advantage of the fact we always film our wrap-ups late.
Yeah, and the fact we were already talking about the third book in the series. It's more efficient to do it that way. Up and onwards.
Not much further up your average marks can go.
I know. 5 is a limit in out of 5. So.
Yes, even when you give quarter stars.
Yeah.
My first is a book that's been on the TBR for a while. It's the 3rd volume of Amulet by Kazu Kibuishi.
I've already read it.
You have? Which continues to be cute, but I'm not sure compelling enough to carry on with. This is a middle grade following a pair of kids and their mum who gets taken along for the ride rather than fridged, which makes a nice change. The primary protagonist is the older sister, and she has to wrestle with a sentient evil sentient semi-evil artifact, and is the rallying point for the forces that are attempting to save this secondary world that she stumbled into through her granddad's basement.
I don't remember much about this because we happened to read it. Because I happened to read it on the same weekend that we watched the Studio Ghibli movie, Laputa Castle in the Sky, which I now see as the same story. Even just from the cover you can see Sky Cities.
Lots of airships. And it looks like the world expands out quite a bit at the end of this 3rd volume. So if you have continued on with the series, do let us know what you think and whether we should continue.
In a shocking turn of events, the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series was actually my least favourite thing I read this month, at 4 stars. This is Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan and McGuire. This follows some students at Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, which is essentially a school for kids that have gone to magical portal worlds and returned not quite able to fit in anymore. This follows some of the characters that we met in the 1st book, and for me feels a lot more similar to the 1st book than the 2nd. So the 2nd is my favourite of the series because it really deep dives into essentially back history of 2 characters, one single portal adventure, which was just a really tight-knit story that just gripped me, and it was great, and I loved the characters and everything. Whereas this follows kind of more...
It's a traditional quest.
Yeah.
That only works if you have access to non-linear time.
True. I really like that we got to actually see a few more examples of what these worlds are like, and also get to know some of those characters a little better, and hopefully it's introduced some more new characters that I'll enjoy seeing in later books. So very much a strong continuation of the series.
Also, this book makes it abundantly clear the book is centred around the school and what happens there, and so could keep going forever. It's not around the actions of a particular cohort. It's not following the chosen one through the school. It's using the school as a framework.
Yeah.
And I'd quite happily keep reading them forever, so it works for me.
No, I will look forward to these as they continue to get released.
Next up is Volume 7 of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, which continues to be weird and wacky and full of sex and drugs and violence. And it's narrated by a kid. So what could go wrong? I wonder if I am going to be able to keep reading this. I'm not very good with series that sort of just go on and on and on. It's nice to have an arc and know that there is an overarching story being told, and know that at some point it's going to be done. Not least because as the series continues, my ability to keep track of who's who and remember what's going on diminishes with each individual one, and the time cost of rereading previous instalments just keeps going up. So, not sure. We'll see. To some extent, it might depend if, you know, if the creators come out and say, no, it's going to be a 13-book series, we know exactly where it's going to end, then that might incentivise me to keep going.
It's interesting what you've said in comparison to Wayward Children, where they might be unending and you're really excited, to Saga, which might be unending and you're...
But Saga keeps calling back to previous characters and dragging them forward.
This is one story, whereas Wayward Children is a series of interconnected novellas, but where they stand alone. The next book, which is actually my second favourite of the month at 4.25 stars, is Becky Chambers. I would not have ever thought that this would end up second on a list. We've already done a review for this, which we will link down below, so I'm not going to talk too much, except to say that it follows a group of people who live on these huge city-sized spaceships. It was really interesting learning more about how that world works and how their society is structured. But for me, Close and Common Orbit, where you really deep dive into a couple of characters, was more powerful. That's not saying at all that I didn't like this. I very much did. Probably on par for me with the first one in the series. Ultimately, a hopeful book, which is nice in these times. As a brief aside, how pretty do these two books look together?
This is a slightly odd one. Some time ago, in the sort of 5 to 10 year range, I acquired about 3 books in the Quantum Gravity series by Justina Robson. Last year, you may recall, I picked up book 1 in the series. I was very excited. I'd actually be able to keep on reading them, and I've had them forever. Turns out, the books I have downstairs are 3, 4 and 5 in the series. So if anybody's got a spare number 2 in the Quantum Gravity series, do drop me a note and we'll see if we can sort something out. This is a series set in a fractured universe. A particle accelerator experiment went horribly wrong and everybody woke up remembering that, of course, there's always been a number of interconnected planes and magic is totally real. And you would think this is the start to a fantasy series, but as you'll be able to tell from the cover if you zoom in a long way, actually it's kind of a sci-fi story. The protagonist is a cyborg out on her first mission after she got rebuilt by the government after dying on a previous assignment. Considering it was published over a decade ago, it actually feels surprisingly modern, with this sort of blend of science fiction and fantasy, which, you know, two great tastes that go great together. So as I say, I am looking out for number 2 in the series, and not just so I can get the others off my TBR, I am actually genuinely enjoying the series. Another
Story that we both read this month, mainly because I read it while you were out, and then promptly when you got back went, John, you want to read this? You want to read this so I can talk to you about it, otherwise I'm going to spoil it. I really liked this. This was like my favourite thing I read this month. 4.5 stars, 4.75 stars, something like that. I don't even know how to rate graphic novels because I don't feel like I've read enough. This is my favourite. This is the first volume of Monstress, called Awakening, by Marjorie Liu and Takeda.
The Awakening there does not refer to the protagonist, but in fact the ancient evil that inhabits her. As you'd imagine, this leads to plot.
Yeah, this is absolutely beautiful. The artwork is stunning. I'm not going to try and show you all the pages, but this front cover kind of illustrates the style. So much detail on some of these pages, it's ridiculous. You could have made a full wall painting out of many of them. But dark, mysterious. The world feels quite familiar, but there's definitely elements we don't recognise.
And it doesn't feel like the world started on page 1. We're jumping in and there's history and there's depth. apparent from the get-go.
This is one of those graphic novels where I actually want to reread it because I think I would get more from it second time round, which is nice to see.
It's also another one for the pile to give to people that insist that graphic novels are just comics for kids.
Not for kids.
No, deeply not for kids. One of them gets eaten. More of them get tortured and dismembered.
Yeah, there's a lot of violence. Particularly towards kids, so yeah, not a light read at all. It starts with a slave auction, and the main character clearly has trauma in her past, and that is not something she's just able to shrug off. So for me it was dark and dangerous, but validly so, and it wasn't treated lightly. The world is seeing a war between the kind of normal humans and the Arcanics, who are kind of partly descended from immortals. So there's lots of division, persecution, and a way to explore lots of very real themes. But with all that darkness, there is still quite a lot of cuteness. The sidekicks in particular. If you haven't picked this up yet, then I really recommend that you do. Although we are not the only ones saying this, because I think it's been nominated on pretty much every major graphic novel award shortlist that I've seen.
I think we originally picked this up because it was nominated for the BookTube SFF award a couple of years ago now.
Yeah, everyone's on to the third one now.
We never quite got around to reading it.
Very pleased I have. And now there's more of them for me to read before I forget what's gone on in this one.
My next book is in fact 2 books. It's the Clocktaur War duology by Ursula Vernon, writing as T. Kingfisher. These follow a ragtag band of adventurers on a suicide mission. I picked these up at Worldcon after watching Ursula on a panel and having followed her on Twitter for years, and she's just as funny in novel form. This novel was written in response to depictions of paladins in video games, particularly deeply morose, angsty paladins, and trying to think about actually what sort of person gives up that much of their will to a god, and what it means to have absolute certainty of your god's presence or absence. Possibly one of the most interesting looks at that kind of very interventionist religion, sort of so common from role-playing and video games. You know, if your god can cause you to cure wounds, then you know there is something up there. And there's one scene in here where the exiled paladin goes back to witness a church service, and he knows that the god fills the church, but just isn't willing to touch this exiled paladin, and had me in tears, as the book did in a couple of different places, which is quite impressive considering I think it's ostensibly a comedy. And it did have me giggling ridiculously in several places. Has some wonderful ideas, like the ninja bookkeeper who breaks into your opponent's place of work and falsifies their accounts the day before an audit so they get shut down by the government. Yeah, I'm kind of frothing about these, and I will be thrusting them into hands of various people. Now that I've wrapped them up.
And that's everything we read last month. Let us know if you've read any of these and have any thoughts on them, or especially if you've read any of the later books in any of these series and can give us an idea of which ones to stick with, although I warn you, there is nothing you can say about Monstress that will not make me want to read on. Don't test it. Thank you for watching, we'll see you again soon.